They do meet again later. We'll read about that here after a while. But Jonathan and David then part. They have this prearranged signal. They have this prearranged signal in the event of, in case of, that Jonathan is being watched, that Jonathan is with his father. Jonathan is unable to communicate directly with David. They arrange this signal to one another. But God does allow them to meet face to face. We find that they have a very sad meeting here at the end of chapter 20. Verse 41 tells it all, I think. When the lad was gone, David rose from the south side and fell on his face to the ground and bowed 3 times. And they kissed each other and wept together, but David more. David clearly is still just sort of overwhelmed with what's happening. You can understand his confusion. You can understand his frustration. He's trying to figure out what he's done wrong, what fault he has with Saul. Can't figure it out. To the best of his knowledge, he hasn't done anything wrong. And he's got to leave his family. He's got to leave his home. He's got to leave his best friend. And so we can understand his sorrow at this. I want to then now move on to chapter 21 as we get into this section of these are the beginning of David's outlaw years. And so David will live for a number of years as an outlaw. He will become the leader of an outlaw band roaming around central Palestine. This entire area. David leaves from here, starting in verse 1 of chapter 21. Then David came to Nob, to Ahimelech the priest, and Ahimelech came trembling to meet David and said to him, "Why are you alone and no one with you?" And David said to Ahimelech the priest, "The king has commissioned me on a matter, and he has said to me, 'Let no one know anything about the matter on which I am sending you and with which I have commissioned you, and I have directed the young men to a certain place. Now, therefore, what do you have on hand? Give me 5 loaves of bread or whatever can be found." And the priest answered David and said, "There is no ordinary bread on hand, but there is consecrated bread, if only the young men have kept themselves from women." And David answered the priest and said, Surely women have been kept from us previously when I set out and the vessels of the young men were holy, though it was an ordinary journey. How much more then today will their vessels be holy?" So the priest gave him consecrated bread, for there was no bread there, but the bread of the presence, which was removed from before the Lord, in order to put hot bread in its place when it was taken away. Now one of the servants of Saul was there that day, detained before the Lord, and his name was Doeg, the Edomite, the chief of Saul's shepherds. And David said to Ahimelech, "Now is there not a spear or sword on hand? For I brought neither my sword nor my weapons with me, because the king's matter was urgent." Then the priest said, "The sword of Goliath, the Philistine, whom you killed in the valley of Elah, behold, it is wrapped in a cloth behind the ephod. If you would take it for yourself, take it. For there is no other except it here." And David said, "There is none like it. Give it to me." So he flees to the city of Nob, or the town. I guess we'd call it a town or a village of Nob. This is where the priests. You remember there had been the destruction at Shiloh. There had been the destruction of the tabernacle, of the worship, of everything that was done there at Shiloh. And the Philistines had overrun it. They had destroyed that area. These priests had taken the artifacts of their religion and had brought them to Nob. And so Nob is a village here located, it's about 1.5 miles north or so, about 1.5 miles, 2 miles northeast of Jerusalem. And so they have moved here. Why does he flee there? Why does David think to go there? And the answer is perhaps that he seeks to inquire of the Lord. He had first, if you recall, gone to Samuel with that sort of that purpose in mind. Now, then he'd gone back to see Jonathan. Now, realizing that Saul is committed to kill him, he goes back to religious leaders seeking advice from God. But David there, when he's there, he meets Ahimelech and frankly lies through his teeth to him. Tells him, well, I'm on the king's business. I'm on a secret mission. That's essentially the storyline that he's adopted. I'm on a secret mission for Saul. Well, of course, that was a lie. If anything, this again demonstrates the truth and the accuracy of the account, of the veracity of this account to us. If this was written, if this had been written long after the fact in praise of David, you tend to leave out little details like people lying out of the storyline. Not so the Bible. Here is David, a man after God's own heart, but he lied. He lied through his teeth to Ahimelech, and he knew he was lying. He admits he was lying later on. We find here, David is going to go through a long period here as an outlaw leader where he's going to be encountering a number of challenges, a number of tests of his faith. And we will see how those tests of his faith shape him over time. And it really does strengthen his faith. It really does cause him to come out of this with a much stronger faith than when he goes into it. But again, he lies to Ahimelech. He says, yeah, we're on a secret mission. David and his men then take the bread of the presence. That's the only bread that's available. Now, they're not allowed to eat the bread of the presence, okay? The bread of the presence is reserved for the priests. And we find that over in Leviticus 24. If you turn with me there. Leviticus 24. And starting in verse 5, it says, then you shall take fine flour and bake 12 cakes of it. 2/10 of an ephah shall be in each cake. And you shall set them in 2 rows, 6 to a row, on the pure gold table before the Lord. And you shall put pure frankincense on each row, that it may be a memorial portion for the bread, even an offering by fire to the Lord. Every Sabbath day he shall set in order before the Lord continually. It is an everlasting covenant for the sons of Israel. And it shall be for Aaron and his sons. And they shall eat it in a holy place, for it is holy to them, for the Lord's offerings by fire, his portion forever. This was for Aaron and his sons. David, of course, from the tribe of Judah, he's not part of Aaron's lineage, not allowed to eat this. And yet he eats it anyway. Now, Jesus refers to this event over in the book of Matthew, in Matthew, the 12th chapter. And if we read verses 1 through 8, it says, at that time, Jesus went on the Sabbath through the grain fields, and his disciples became hungry and began to pick the heads of grain and eat. But when the Pharisees saw it, they said to him, behold, your disciples do what is not lawful to do on a Sabbath. But he said to them, have you not read what David did when he became hungry, he and his companions? How he entered the house of God, and they ate the consecrated bread, which was not lawful for him to eat, nor for those with him, but for the priests alone? Or have you not read in the law that on the Sabbath the priests of the temple break the Sabbath and are innocent? But I say to you that something greater than the temple is here. And if you had known what this means, I desire compassion and not sacrifice, you would have not condemned the innocent. For the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. Notice you recall this situation here. Jesus here being confronted by the Pharisees because he and his disciples going through a grain field are plucking up the heads of grain, and they're separating the grain from the chaff, and they're eating the grain. Okay? This activity that Jesus' disciples does actually was completely legal under the Old Testament law, but it had been made illegal by the traditions of the Pharisees. And Jesus here is showing them how silly their notions are about the Sabbath, about that law keeping. He's showing them how silly that notion is by even taking them back to the Old Testament account here. As he says, haven't you read about David and read what he did there? What did David do? He ate bread that it was unlawful for him to eat. Jesus admits it was unlawful for him to eat. What was the point? Well, God didn't strike David dead, immediately, did he? He struck other men dead immediately for their failure to be mindful of his law, but he didn't strike David dead, didn't strike Ahimelech dead. So what was the message here from God? That the severity of this situation, God was willing to extend grace to David and forgive him of this sin, is the implication. And Jesus is using this as an example of, not being of condemning these Pharisees and their obsession with all of the minutia that they had come out with regarding the Sabbath. Yeah. Ahimelech. Yeah. Yes. Yes. Yeah, he might have indeed done that, as a means of trying to protect the priests. And we'll talk about that in a few minutes, because we're going to talk about how Saul learns about this and about the role of this one character here, Doeg the Edomite, who, for his own purposes, decides to omit certain key facts from Saul. And so again, we see this event unfold. David, as we mentioned here, here comes the role of this Doeg the Edomite, who is mentioned here. He's present. He's described as Saul's chief shepherd. I think Josephus identifies him as the keeper of the mules. That was suggesting that was his role. But he was detained. It says he was detained. It says he was detained before the Lord in verse 7. And some of the commentators reading that, some commentators suggest that he may have been there presenting some sacrifice on behalf of Saul, or taking care of some other religious duty on behalf of Saul. Others have suggested a little more uncharitably, that perhaps Doeg was there because he was being detained. He was being detained because of some criminal act, and was there under essentially under the guardianship of these priests for having committed some criminal act. And so that would certainly, as they say here, explain his hatred of these priests, his anger, his willingness ultimately to put them to death. We see here, and we have an advantage here, though. We have an advantage here. We can read the account. We can read what happened according to the historian. But we also have another advantage in this, in that we have David's own perception of this. Here is Doeg the Edomite here. If we go over to the book of Psalms and we look at the 52nd Psalm, and it should have at the top of that psalm, it should have the notation of for the choir director, a maskil of David. When Doeg the Edomite came and told Saul and said to him, David has come to the house of Ahimelech. So Doeg informs Saul of what's been done. He tells Saul how David had come to Ahimelech. And here is David's reaction to this. He says, why do you boast in evil, O mighty man? The loving kindness of God endures all day long. Your tongue devises destruction like a sharp razor, O worker of deceit. You love evil more than good, falsehood more than speaking what is right. You love all words that devour, O deceitful tongue. But God will break you down forever. He will snatch you up and tear you away from your tent and uproot you from the land of the living. And the righteous will see and fear and will laugh at him, saying, behold, the man who would not make God his refuge, but trusted in the abundance of his riches and was strong in his evil desire. But as for me, I am like a green olive tree in the house of God. I trust in the loving kindness of God forever and ever. And I will give thee thanks forever because thou hast done it. And I will wait on thy name, for it is good in the presence of thy godly ones. And so you can hear the anger, you can hear the rage that David has against this man. You can hopefully hear in these lines of the words of this song, you can hear that anger coming out. That he knows what Doeg has done. He knows how Doeg has condemned innocent men to death. And David is assured that God is going to punish him, that God's going to judge him. But you can hear that anger coming out in David, in the lines of David's song against this man. David goes on then, he asks for a sword, he asks for a weapon. He receives, they give him Goliath's sword. That's the only sword they've got. David had wrapped it up. They had probably left it, taken it there with them as a historical artifact, just a trophy of war. And so now they're going to give David Goliath's sword. The Bible, some Bible critics rather, try to suggest this is some kind of an error or some kind of getting the storyline out of order, out of sequence is what they try to explain, try to claim that the storyline's out of sequence because David would have had plenty of time, they argue, to go back to his home, get his weapons, and be on his way. Well, in considering that criticism or in developing that criticism, they're ignoring the fact that David, of course, first went to Samuel seeking advice. He then went back to Jonathan seeking advice. He's hiding out in the fields because he doesn't know what Saul's real intention is. And when Jonathan comes back and reports that, yes, my father is trying to kill you, David has to run for his life. He's not going to go back into the city. He's not going to go back into his house and get his possessions. He's going to run for his life. And he didn't really realize the full extent of Saul's attack against him until it was really too late. And now he's got to run for his life. And so naturally he has no weapon with him. All right. Knowing that Doeg the Edomite has recognized him, David now flees from there. He flees from there and he goes to Gath. So you can imagine what kind of a risky move this is, because here he is now carrying the sword of Goliath, which probably would have been a fairly well-recognized sword, and he's taking it back to the Goliath's hometown, where people are going to, likely recognize who he is. And of course they do recognize who he is. We see this in verse 10. Then David arose and fled that day from Saul and went to Achish, king of Gath. But the servants of Achish said to him, Is this not David, the king of the land? Do thou not sing of this one as they dance, saying, Saul hath slain his thousands, and David his 10,000s? And David took these words to heart and greatly feared Achish, king of Gath. So he disguised his sanity before him and acted insanely in their hands, and scribbled on the doors of the gate and let saliva run down into his beard. Then Achish said to his servants, Behold, you see this man behaving as a madman. Why did you bring him to me? Do I lack madmen that you have brought this one to my act as a madman in my presence? Shall this one come into my house? It's a great quote. Yes, you can understand Achish's, consternation. What, do I need more madmen that you brought me another one? And you see David's behavior here. David flees from Nob. He realizes he's been recognized by Doeg. He goes to Achish. He's hoping probably to hide anonymously among the Philistines, even though he's toting around Goliath's sword, which probably wasn't the most clever move he could have made. He is recognized, of course, nearly immediately. All of his servants are pointing him out, going, wait a minute, this is the one they've been singing about. He's slain his 10,000s. And so his enemies know his reputation. They even call him, you notice they call him the king of the land. And you might wonder why they call him the king of the land. This may have been, again, some of the commentators suggest maybe an acknowledgement of David's military prowess, that he is a king of the land from the Philistine point of view. He is a sort of a co-ruler in some sense, along with Saul. Or they may well know that David has been anointed. They may well be aware of that and are fully aware that he is been anointed to be the next king of Israel. We don't know. David, though, pretends to be mad to mitigate the suspicion against him. We do know that among these cultures, among these Middle Eastern cultures, it was considered, madness was a sign from the gods among some of these cultures, and it was considered to be very bad luck to kill a madman, because the idea was if the gods had decided that this one was to be mad and you killed him, maybe they might decide that you need to take his place, and so there was a strong cultural prohibition against this. Again, we can find out what David actually thinks of this, because he records it in the Psalms, over in Psalms, the 34th chapter. This is a psalm of David when he feigned madness before Abimelech, who drove him away, and he departed. And so this is that time, and here's what David says about it. He says, I will bless the Lord at all times. With his praise shall continually be in my mouth. My soul shall make its boast in the Lord. The humble shall hear it and rejoice. Oh, magnify the Lord with me, and let us exalt his name together. Remember what it said. David was extremely afraid. He was extremely afraid that this man was going to just seize him and put him to death. It certainly would not have been out of character for the Philistines to do this. He says, I sought the Lord, and he answered me and delivered me from all my fears. They looked to him and were radiant, and their faces shall never be ashamed. This poor man cried, and the Lord heard him and saved him out of all his troubles. The angel of the Lord encamps around those who fear him and rescues them. And so here he is. He called, notice he's referring to himself. This poor man, he refers to himself in the third person. This poor man cried out to God and was rescued. And that's how he sees what happened to him here. He sees this as a rescue from the hands of his enemies. Verse 8, oh, taste and see that the Lord is good. How blessed is the man who takes refuge in him. Oh, fear the Lord, you his saints, for to those who fear him there is no want. The young lions do not lack and suffer hunger, but they who seek the Lord shall not be in want of any good thing. Come, you children, listen to me. I will teach you the fear of the Lord. Who is the man that desires life and loves length of days that he may see good? Keep your tongue from evil and your lips from seeking deceit. Depart from evil and do good. Seek peace and pursue it. The eyes of the Lord are toward the righteous. His ears are open to their cry. The face of the Lord is against evildoers, to cut off the memory of them from the earth. The righteous cry, and the Lord hears and delivers them out of their troubles. The Lord is near to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. You get some sense of David's despair. You get some sense of the stress he must be under. As he, I believe, frankly, in these verses, he's describing himself. He describes himself as the righteous crying out to the Lord. He delivers them from their trouble. The Lord is near to the brokenhearted. David's brokenhearted. He saves those who are, as it says, crushed in spirit. And so we see David here as he describes himself in this scene, in this episode here, where he's having to feign madness, and we see his own thoughts about this. He has appealed to God, and God has been pleased to protect him. And this is David's praise to God for this. Verse 19, many are the afflictions of the righteous, but the Lord delivers him out of them all. He keeps all his bones, not one of them is broken. Evil shall slay the wicked, and those who hate the righteous will be condemned. The Lord redeems the souls of his servants, and none of them who take refuge in him will be condemned. Again, we see David, as he, I believe, again, effectively describes himself, praising God for protecting the righteous and delivering them from evil. And I believe, again, that he is speaking directly of himself in this event of being defended. We also can see over in verse 56, Psalm 56, and there we have for the choir director, according to Jonath Elam Rehokim, a Miktam of David, when the Philistines seized him in Gath. Again, this is another song written of this episode here. The fact that David wrote 2 of his psalms in remembrance of these events tells us how deeply this was ingrained on his mind. How much he was deeply afraid that this was going to be the end of his life. Psalm 56, be gracious, O God, for man has trampled upon me. Fighting all day long, he oppresses me. My foes have trampled on me all day long, for there are many who fight proudly against me. When I am afraid, I will put my trust in thee. In God, whose word I praise, in God I have put my trust. I shall not be afraid. What can mere man do to me? You see again here, David, I believe, is speaking very much of himself, deeply in fear, and all he can do is put his trust in God. That's the solution to the problem. I'll simply put my trust in God, and this will work out. All day long, they distort my words. All their thoughts are against me for evil. They attack, they lurk, they watch my steps, as they have waited to take my life. Because of wickedness, cast them forth. In anger, put down the peoples, O Lord, O God. Thou hast taken account of my wanderings. Put my tears in thy bottle. Are they not in thy book? Now, I like that verse. That's a very interesting verse there. Again, it shows the stress, the frustration, the grief that David has over the situation he's in. There's almost a little bit of woe is me here in some of these verses. And we might understand, rightfully so perhaps, that David feels himself to be unfairly put upon, unfairly persecuted because of the situation that he finds himself in. But I like this idea of put my tears in thy bottle. There are so many tears here that he's weeping that they would fill up a bottle. He says, then my enemies will turn back in the day when I call. This I know, that God is for me. In God whose word I praise, in the Lord whose word I praise, in God I have put my trust. I shall not be afraid. What can man do to me? Thy vows are binding upon me, O God. I will render thanks offerings to thee, for thou hast delivered my soul from death, indeed my feet from stumbling, that I may walk before God in the light of the living. And again, we see him as he focuses on putting his trust in God. He's basically out of support. He's being chased out of the one place he thought he could run to and hide, and he's being chased away from there. So now he's got to go to somewhere else. But again, we get an interesting insight into David's thinking about this as we read through some of these Psalms. From there, then, chapter 22, go back to 1 Samuel, and now we're in chapter 22. And now David flees from the Philistines. He flees to Moab. So he's going from sort of the western edge of the nation of Israel. Now he goes to the eastern edge of the nation of Israel. From where he was at Gath, which is near that western border between Philistia and Palestine, or Philistia and Judah. Now he flees to the east. Moab would have been on the eastern bank of the Jordan River, and so he's crisscrossing the country of Israel, trying to keep away from Saul. So he goes to Moab, chapter 22. So David departed from there and escaped to the cave of Adullam. And when his brothers and all his father's household heard of it, they went down there to him. And everyone who was in distress, and everyone who was in debt, and everyone who was discontented gathered to him, and he became captain over them. Now there were about 400 men with him. So here we find David's family begins to gather to him, begins to gather and support him. And in addition, he rounds up what we would call the riffraff. He becomes leader of an outlaw band. Virtually every outlaw in the nation ends up gravitating toward David. Because, here they've got somebody who he himself is an outlaw, and so they become a band of outlaws together. The cave of Adullam is again near the border between Philistia and Judah. Scholars will note that in this land there are hundreds of caves, and it is something of a no man's land, or would have been in this day something of a no man's land, with the way the terrain is there. David went from there to Mizpah of Moab, and he said to the king of Moab, let my father and my mother come and stay with you until I know what God will do for me. Then he left them with the king of Moab, and they stayed with him all the time that David was in the stronghold. And the prophet Gad said to David, do not stay in the stronghold, depart and go into the land of Judah. So David departed and went into the forest of Hereth. David turns to Moab for protection. This would have been a natural thing for him to do for a number of reasons. First of all, his father is the grandson of a Moabitess. He's the grandson of Ruth, and so has a family relationship of some sort back with Moab. And then second of all, here Saul has recently attacked the Moabites. The Moabites undoubtedly are going to be hostile to Saul and are not going to be unfriendly to a potential opponent of Saul. And so it would be a natural thing for David then to go into these people and present himself and ask for protection. He apparently spends some time here in Moab, because it is ultimately not until the prophet Gad, as we see here in verse 5, he finally comes to David and says, you need to leave Moab and you need to go into Judah. In verse 6, the storyline shifts back now to the doings of Saul. And here we see Saul, and now he's found out about, he's of course learned from Doeg what happened at Nob, and so he goes to confront the priest there. Then Saul heard that David and the men who were with him had been discovered. Now Saul was sitting in Gibeah under the tamarisk tree on the height with his spear in his hand, and all his servants were standing around him. And Saul said to the servants who were standing around him, "Hear now, O Benjamites, will the son of Jesse also give you all fields and vineyards? Will he also make you commanders of thousands and commanders of hundreds? For all of you have conspired against me, so there is no one who discloses to me when my son makes a covenant with the son of Jesse, and there is none of you who is sorry for me or discloses to me that my son has stirred up my servant against me to lie in ambush, as it is to this day." Then Doeg the Edomite, who was standing by the servants of Saul, answered him and said, "I saw the son of Jesse coming to Nob, to Ahimelech the son of Ahitub. And he inquired of the Lord for him, gave him provisions, and gave him the sword of Goliath the Philistine." So here is Saul confronting his commanders, his troops there. Notice how he addresses them, though. "O Benjamites," which suggests that all of these men that are now in his court, they are all of his own tribe. He has exclusively selected these leaders from his own tribe. There is apparently no diversity in this group. They're all from his own tribe, and he accuses them. He points out he's trying to work on them a little bit, going, if you're thinking about joining David, do you think he's going to give you all these rewards for service like I've been handing out? Do you think he's going to hand that out, or is he going to be handing them out to his own tribe? Whereas I've been rewarding the Benjamites, he's going to reward somebody else. And so he's trying to create that hostility, create that suspicion within his own men, because apparently some of them have in fact been defecting to David. And so he's trying to stop that. And also, again, notice his attitude. First of all, he accuses his own son. Who conspired against me. There is no one who discloses to me when my son makes a covenant with the son of Jesse. None of you told me that Jonathan was the son of David. Well, for crying out loud, that should have been obvious to Saul. Saul knew that. He's simply using that as a vehicle to accuse these men. But we notice again that hostility he has for David, even the hostility that he transfers to his own son for what's happened here. And notice he tries to have this little pity party for himself. As he says here, none of you who is sorry for me. I find that line amazing. None of you is sorry for me. He's looking for pity. Can you imagine this man, the king of Israel, who has attacked now David, a man who never did anything to him, and here's a man who is trying to stir up pity for himself. I mean, this man is incredible. It really is incredible when you think about it. That he would now turn against David in such a spiteful way, and he demands pity for doing it. It becomes an incredible behavior on his part. It says, you see what Doeg the Edomite says. He said, I saw the son of Jesse coming to Nob, to Ahimelech the son of Ahitub, and he inquired for the Lord for him and gave him provisions and gave him the sword of Goliath the Philistine. You might notice here, Doeg leaves out an important fact. Doeg leaves out, he omits very carefully, I think, he omits an important fact. And that is that Ahimelech understood he was doing it at the command of Saul. David, of course, had lied to Ahimelech. he had lied and told Ahimelech, yes, I'm doing this, but I'm doing Saul's mission here. I'm on a mission from Saul, and that's why I'm doing this. And so Ahimelech had agreed to help him on the understanding that he was working for Saul. And of course, we'll see Ahimelech later. We'll see him defending himself in exactly that way. I was doing this on the understanding that David was on a mission from you. And of course, Saul doesn't want to hear it. Saul doesn't want to accept it. And we'll study that. I'm not going to go into that section. We got it. It's almost 20 after. I'm going to stop here, and we'll continue on with this section then next week and conclude this and go on in to chapter 23. Thank you for your attention this morning.